Made it back to the Embassy Cemetery one more time. Image 10 would really like to thank you guys for all coming out. This is our opportunity. We thought the Living Dead weekend would be a good time when lots of fans were from out of town come in for this tribute. And this is what I would like to call it. It is a tribute. We've been, and believe me, I probably wrote 10 different scripts and I threw them all away and just said, you know, if you can't say something from the heart, it's not worth saying. You're going to hear a lot of that from the guests that are going to come up to the podium. What can we say? We lost a spirit. I still, it's been how many months, I still can't really formulate the words to express my loss. I don't even know what that loss is. And I think a lot of other people share that feeling. So rather than stand here and babble, what we'd like to do today, and this is modeled after George's memorial service in Toronto that Suzanne and company put together. Just let the people that cast and crew members and people that were touched by George, a lot of them you'll find in the exact same way. But I don't see any better way to give a tribute and let you people have real inside information from these people that were touched by George. So I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of stuff. A little at a loss for words. So hopefully that will break, and hopefully we got, Lord only knows, a spectacular day to do this. And let's start. Who wants to come up first? Nobody. Nobody wants to break the ice after this remarkable introduction.
Well, in Toronto, I got there and I didn't think I was going to cry because I'm not a big crier about anything. And I got there and there were a lot of memories of George displayed all around. And one of the ones that really got me was a shot of him from behind, and it like with the rewinds. And Night of the Living Dead and all our films for the longest time were edited with those rewinds and a sound reader and a synchronizer and a little movie scope with a screen about that big. And that's we didn't even have a moviola or a chem table back then. Now it's a lot easier with digital editing and so on. But George had this uncanny ability to make those, you had to keep those, to make the picture and sound play at anything like normal speed, you had to have coordination to be able to do that. And George had that kind of coordination spectacularly. And he'd be sitting there and you had to hang film in bins. And George, we used to say he had film coming out of his ears. Film would be in his mouth, film would be all over the floor, film would be all over the bins, and he'd be there with those rewinds. Well, I just broke down and couldn't even talk. I was crying, and Rob Lucas was patting me on the back. But I was okay when I came up to make my remarks, and I'm not going to tell the whole thing. A lot of you have heard the story about how, or read it, about how George and I met when we were 18 years old, and he came down to the street dressed like one of the characters in the movie Viva Zapata with a big sombrero and all that. I told that story. I figured I'd tell it in Toronto because there might be people there that hadn't heard it. But I ended my remarks the same way I'm going to end them now. That George and I and Russ, and we were fans of, we really liked the style and the aura and the charisma of Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis, Dean Martin, that whole thing, you know. We were talking about it one day, and I said that the world is a poorer place without them. And then I said, you know, George made his mark on the world, and the world is a poorer place without George Romero, and I'm almost crying to say that, but thank you very much. That's all I'm going to say today, and I think it's enough maybe for me.
Yeah, and please, just when one comes off, someone else come up. Appreciate that.
Well, before I get to the microphone, is there anyone who can't hear me exactly? And it's my son's audio system, so I will use it. But I just want everyone to know that right here is a significant part of film history. Led by George, this wily band of people who decided that they were going to make a real movie. The very first day of filming on Night of the Living Dead was in this exact spot. Well, how do you know, Russ, that it was the exact spot? Because when Barbara and Johnny drive up in the car, we knew from a storytelling point of view that Barbara was eventually going to release the handbrake, so we had to park the car on a grade. Where you're standing right now is exactly where the car was parked. So in a certain sense, this Evans City Cemetery, the town of Evans City, George Romero and the rest of his wily band of filmmakers, this right here is where it all started. So thank you, George. Thank you, Evans City. Thank you, Evans City Cemetery, for helping to get our movie balloon off the ground. Can people hear me, or should I go to the podium? Everyone can hear okay?
Go to the
All
podium.
right.
In the back.
Decided that I wasn't going to use the remarks today that I used in Toronto, but I think I will, because it's the kind of story that will give you a little better impression of George Romero and the, let's say, the experimental way that he approached problem solving related to the movie business. Our very, very first job, our very first commercial job, was for Buell Planetarium, which is a science organization here in Pittsburgh, still is. We got a job to make it look as though a rocket ship was landing on the moon. Okay, well, how do we do that? The planetarium had constructed a rather large moonscape, and it was up to us as to how we made it look like a rocket ship was landing on that moonscape. Our very good friend and close colleague in the early days was Mark Ritchie, Rudy Ritchie's brother, Richard Ritchie's cousin. Mark was a certifiable genius. He really was. He had a genius of mathematics. He was also an amateur rocketeer. Mark knew how to make solid rocket fuel in small batches. So, who do you call? You call your friends. Mark, we need to whip up some fuel to make it look as though these little model rockets are actually, this model rocket is landing on the moon. Mark said, sure, I can tell you how to do that. And Mark was quite skillful at whipping up batches of this mixture to convert it into rocket fuel. And by the way, it's very close to what they actually use. So Mark instructed us, and we were experimenting. I think it was on a Sunday morning. We should mix up, George, we should mix up a batch of rocket fuel, but you know, it's Sunday morning, Mark's probably not around. he instructed us pretty well. I think we can do it ourselves. And George agreed. Why are you laughing? What could possibly go wrong? At any rate, at our very first storefront, Latent Image, we had a hot plate and a porcelain pot that we used for, heating soup and that kind of thing. So we poured the ingredients for our rocket fuel into this, and one thing that Mark never let us forget, as you heat this concoction, don't let it get too brown. Well, too brown is sort of a relative term, but we thought we had it. So, in go the ingredients. It was George's job to stir the pot. It was my job to hold the pot because it was just a little hot plate. So, I'm holding the handle. George is stirring. And it's looking good. The viscosity is looking good. Everything is looking pretty good. And I said, George, you remember what Mark said about don't let it get too brown. George, it's looking like it's getting pretty brown. George, this stuff is getting really, really brown. I put the pot down and took off, and George was immediately behind me. This was in the back room of our place of business. This stuff blew up. It got too brown. We ran out onto East Carson Street, followed by this acrid, billowing smoke coming out of our storefront, Latent Image. The fire department came. We had quite a ways. It was one of the first ways, actually, that George left his mark on the world of filmmaking. The fire department and the police were not very pleased with us, but they were convinced that we weren't terrorists or anything like that. Our rocket fuel just simply blew up on us. It got too brown. But the reason for that story is that kind of experimentation, that kind of vision about how do you really make it look real, how do you make it feel real, was something that never left